Before we go any further, I want you to think about something for a second. Something most people never question seriously. What if you are not actually bad with money, and the problem is not your discipline or your spending habits? What if your money is slowly disappearing every single month, even when you feel like you are doing everything right? You go to work, you pay your bills on time, you avoid reckless spending, and still something feels slightly off. Not completely broke, not in crisis, but also not moving forward in any meaningful way financially over time. Beakings, if that feeling sounds familiar, then you are exactly who this video is meant for, and you should keep watching closely. And honestly, videos like this only matter if they reach people who are quietly experiencing the same confusing financial situation. So if this hits close to home for you, take a second to like this video so more people can see it. And if you want to understand money on a deeper level, beyond surface advice and quick tips, consider subscribing to this channel. Because what I am about to show you is not just one isolated issue, it is a pattern that explains everything. To read, and once you see this pattern clearly, it becomes almost impossible to go back to thinking about money the same way. I want to tell you about someone I will call Marcus, because his story is more common than most people realize. Marcus got a raise recently, about 6%, and at first it felt like real progress in his financial life. His manager congratulated him, told him he was doing great, and Marcus genuinely believed things were about to improve. But when he sat down later that night and looked at his actual numbers, something did not add up at all. After taxes, his raise added only a small amount to his monthly income, far less than he expected initially. Around the same time, his rent increased, his insurance premium went up, and groceries quietly became more expensive again. And without doing anything irresponsible, without making any big mistake, that entire raise simply disappeared into higher costs. He did not go on a shopping spree. He did not waste money. Yet his financial situation felt almost unchanged. And sitting there, staring at his bank account, he had a quiet thought that many people never say out loud. What am I missing? Because I am doing everything I was told to do, yet nothing seems to actually improve. And the uncomfortable truth is that Marcus is not unlucky. He is not careless. He is statistically normal in today's economy. In fact, if you look closely, his situation reflects what millions of people are quietly experiencing every single month. So instead of focusing only on Marcus, I want to zoom out and show you what the data actually reveals. Because once you see the numbers clearly, you start to realize this is not just personal, it is structural. Right now, roughly 60% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency using their savings alone. And think about what $1,000 actually represents. It is not a luxury expense or a major financial disaster. That is a basic car repair, a broken appliance, or an unexpected medical bill that shows up without warning. Now it gets more uncomfortable, because around 35 to 40% of adults cannot even cover $400. $400 is groceries, gas, maybe a utility bill, something that should be manageable in a stable system. Tito. And nearly 1 in 5 people cannot handle even $100 without borrowing, delaying, or completely reshuffling their finances. When you hear those numbers, it sounds extreme, but this is not poverty. This is the statistical middle. This is what average looks like. And average is far more fragile than most people are willing to admit openly. The median emergency savings in America today sits somewhere between $500 and $1,000 depending on the study. Financial experts recommend 3 to 6 months of expenses, which for most households means at least $10,000 saved. So when the typical household has only a few $100s, that gap is not small. It is enormous. That is not a safety net designed to protect you. It is barely enough to delay the impact of a problem. And this is where things start to feel different, because you realize the issue is not income alone. The issue is that most people are operating with almost no margin, no buffer, no room for anything unexpected. You are not necessarily broke, but you are one small disruption away from becoming financially unstable very quickly. Let me show you what that actually feels like in real life, because numbers alone do not capture the pressure. Imagine your car suddenly breaks down and the repair costs $800. something completely normal and unavoidable. You check your savings and realize you can pay it, but it would leave you with almost nothing afterward. And now the real stress begins. Not the repair itself, but the fear of what happens if anything else goes wrong. That quiet anxiety, that constant calculation in your head, is what a $500 safety net actually feels like. Ichiri. It is not protection. It is pressure. Because every decision suddenly carries the weight of what might happen next. And this is the part most people never say out loud, because on paper, everything still looks fine. You have a job, you pay your bills, you are not in crisis, but internally, you know how fragile things are. And once you understand that feeling, the next part starts to make much more sense very quickly. Because when there is no margin, every unexpected expense does not just cost money. It creates a chain reaction. Kortingt, and that chain reaction usually leads to one place, which is where the real system begins to take over. That place is debt. And not just any debt, but high interest, long-term, quietly compounding debt. Right now, total credit card debt in the United States is over $1 trillion and still increasing. The average interest rate on those balances is now above 20%, sometimes closer to 25%. And here's where the misunderstanding begins, because most people think they are managing their debt responsibly. Duaithor, they make the minimum payment every month, they stay current, and they believe they are slowly reducing the balance. But what is actually happening underneath is very different from what it feels like on the surface. On a typical balance, most of that minimum payment goes toward interest, not toward reducing the principal at all. So the balance barely moves, while the remaining amount continues to grow quietly in the background over time. You think you are making progress, but in reality, you are feeding a system designed to extend that timeline. And the system depends on that misunderstanding, because as long as you feel in control, you will not question it deeply. A $10,000 credit card balance at 20% interest can take decades to fully pay off. And during that time, you might end up paying back nearly double what you originally borrowed without realizing it. That is not just debt. That is a long-term revenue stream, and you are the one generating it. The product is not the credit card itself. The product is your balance and how long you carry it. Doistingt. And once you see it that way, a lot of things that felt normal start to look very different. Now let's move to another area where this pattern becomes even more visible, and that is car financing. The average new car payment today is around $700 to $1,000 per month depending on the loan. And most of those loans are stretched over 6 to 7 years to make the monthly payment feel manageable. That word manageable is important because it creates the illusion that you can comfortably afford the purchase. Tutori. But the monthly payment is not the true cost. It is simply the way the cost is presented to you. Over the life of the loan, you may pay tens of thousands in interest for something that is losing value. So you are financing a depreciating asset while also paying extra for the privilege of doing so over time. And yet, when people make the decision, they rarely think in total cost. They think in monthly terms. Because the system is designed to shift your focus away from the full picture and onto what feels manageable now. Buying lower the monthly payment, extend the timeline, and suddenly, something expensive feels reasonable in the moment. But that decision does not disappear. It follows you for years, quietly reducing your financial flexibility every month. And when combined with everything else, rent, food, insurance, it leaves almost no room to build anything meaningful. This is how people earning decent incomes still feel stuck, because their fixed costs consume nearly everything they make. Not because they are irresponsible, but because they made decisions based on what felt manageable at the time. Worries. And this is where I need to say something clearly, because most people never hear this explained this way. The financial system you are operating in is not neutral. It is designed with very specific incentives in mind. Every product you interact with, credit cards, loans, subscriptions, exists because it generates consistent profit over time. And that profit is not random. It comes from predictable behaviors that most people repeat without realizing it. Banks make money when you carry balances, not when you pay everything off immediately and never pay interest. Car dealerships make more money when you finance longer terms, not when you buy something affordable and finish quickly. Subscription services make more money the longer you forget about them, not when you actively manage every expense. None of this is a conspiracy. It is simply how business models are structured to maximize long-term revenue. And the easiest way to make that revenue predictable is to design default options that most people never question. Minimum payments, long loan terms, auto-renew subscriptions, these are not random features. They are intentional design choices. Karti, because most people accept the default, they follow the path that requires the least effort or the least immediate discomfort. And over time, those small default decisions compound into outcomes that feel confusing but are actually very predictable. You do not wake up one day and decide to struggle financially. It happens gradually through a series of small choices. Choices that felt reasonable at the time. Choices that looked manageable. Choices that everyone around you was also making. And that is why this situation is so widespread. Because the system does not need you to fail dramatically. It only needs you to follow the default path long enough for the math to work against you quietly. That is the part that changes everything once you see it. Because it shifts how you interpret your entire situation. You stop asking what is wrong with you, and you start asking what patterns you have been following unconsciously. And once that shift happens, you begin to notice things that were invisible to you before this moment. Because the problem is not one big mistake. It is a system of small defaults working together over time. Toituro. Now let's talk about the part that feels personal, because not everything comes from the system alone. Some of what is happening is behavioral, and understanding this part is just as important as understanding the system. One of the clearest examples is subscription spending, which most people consistently underestimate by a large margin. The average person believes they spend under $100 per month, but the real number is often double or triple. Streaming services, apps, gym memberships, small recurring charges that feel insignificant individually but add up over time. Copings. And here's the key detail. Many people are paying for subscriptions they are not even using anymore. Not because they chose to waste money, but because they forgot, and the system is designed to benefit from that. That is what makes it dangerous, because it does not feel like spending. It feels like something invisible. And invisible expenses are the hardest to control, because you cannot react to something you do not actively notice. Now combine that with impulse spending, which on average adds a few $100s per month for many people. DCD. These are not massive purchases. They are small decisions made quickly, often without much thought in the moment. A quick online order, a convenient upgrade, something that feels justified because it is not that expensive individually. But when repeated consistently, those small decisions create a steady outflow that slowly erodes your financial progress. And then there is something newer that has become more common recently, often referred to as doom spending. This is when people spend money as a response to stress or uncertainty about the future, trying to feel better temporarily. Idrar. The logic sounds simple. Things feel uncertain, so you justify spending now because tomorrow does not feel guaranteed. But the result is a cycle where spending creates more stress, which then leads to more spending to cope again. None of these behaviors make you irresponsible. They make you human in an environment designed to trigger them. And when you combine these small leaks with the larger structural pressures, the outcome becomes almost inevitable. Your money does not disappear all at once. It fades away through patterns that feel normal until you examine them closely. At this point, you might be wondering why it feels like you are working hard but still not getting ahead financially. And to understand that fully, you need to look beyond individual behavior and examine how resources are actually distributed. Because the financial reality most people experience is not shaped by averages, it is shaped by distribution. Right now, a small percentage of the population holds a disproportionately large share of total wealth in the system, which means when you hear about averages, those numbers are often pulled upward by a small group at the top. So the average can sound healthy, while the typical experience for most people is far less stable. This is why comparing yourself to an average can be misleading, because you are not living in the average reality. You are living in the median, and the median tells a very different and often more uncomfortable story. The median shows what a typical person actually has, and that number is usually much lower than expected. This gap between perception and reality is part of why people feel confused about their financial progress. You look around, you see others appearing successful, and you assume you must be doing something wrong personally. But what you are often seeing is a mix of outliers, debt, and selective visibility rather than true financial stability. People rarely share their full financial situation. They share the visible parts that create a certain impression. The car, the apartment, the lifestyle, without showing the debt or the pressure behind maintaining it consistently. And when you compare your full reality to someone else's highlight version, the comparison is fundamentally distorted. This creates a subtle psychological pressure to keep up, even when keeping up requires decisions that hurt long-term. And those decisions often reinforce the same patterns that are already making progress difficult in the first place. So the issue is not just financial, it is also psychological, shaped by what you see and what you believe is normal. Once you recognize that, you begin to question whether the path you are following is actually leading where you want. And that question is where everything starts to shift, because it opens the door to doing things differently. The charter. Let me show you what this actually looks like over time, because the difference is not immediate, it builds slowly. Imagine two versions of Marcus starting from the exact same point, same income, same city, same opportunities available. In the first version, nothing changes. He follows the same default path that most people around him follow. He keeps the expensive car payment, carries some credit card balance, and saves only when it feels comfortable. There is no major mistake, no dramatic failure, just a continuation of what already feels normal and manageable. Over time, his situation improves slightly, but it never reaches a point where he feels fully secure or flexible. Unexpected expenses still create stress, and bigger life decisions always depend on whether something goes wrong. Now look at the second version, where Marcus makes just a few different decisions early on in his 30s. Instead of financing a new car, he chooses a reliable used one and reduces his monthly obligation significantly. He focuses on eliminating high-interest debt as quickly as possible, even if it requires short-term sacrifice. And once that debt is gone, he redirects that same monthly amount into consistent long-term investing. He does not become extreme, he still lives his life, but he changes the direction of a few key flows. At first, the difference between the two versions is almost invisible. Nothing dramatic happens in the early years. But over time, those small changes begin to compound, and the gap between the two paths becomes increasingly clear. One version remains constrained, always reacting to circumstances, while the other gradually builds flexibility and options. By their 50s, the difference is not subtle anymore. It is the difference between stress and stability. Not because one earned dramatically more money, but because one allowed time to work in his favor. The key point here is not perfection. It is direction, because direction determines where compounding takes you. And most people never change direction, not because they cannot, but because they never clearly see the alternative. Once you see it, the question becomes much simpler. Which version are you slowly becoming right now? I am not telling you this to suggest that everything is easy or that the system does not create real challenges. The structural issues we talked about are real. Housing costs, debt structures, income gaps. All of it affects people daily. You did not design this system, and you are not wrong for feeling frustrated or confused about your financial situation. But at the same time, understanding how the system works gives you something most people never develop: awareness. And awareness is not a guarantee of success, but it is a requirement for making different decisions moving forward. Because once you understand the default paths, you realize they are not inevitable. They are just the easiest options. Minimum payments, long loans, automatic renewals, these are not obligations. They are choices presented as convenience. And convenience often comes at a long-term cost that is not obvious in the moment you make the decision. The system does not need you to fail dramatically. It only needs you to stay on autopilot long enough. Long enough for small disadvantages to compound into outcomes that feel overwhelming when you finally notice them. That is why the most effective change is not extreme behavior. It is consistent awareness applied to everyday decisions. Not reacting emotionally, not chasing quick wins, but quietly adjusting the direction of your financial habits over time. Because direction matters more than intensity, especially when you are dealing with processes that compound over years. And the truth is, most people never make that shift. They stay in patterns that feel normal until it is too late. Not because they are incapable, but because no one ever clearly explained what was actually happening underneath. Pete, that is why this conversation matters. Not to scare you, but to show you something you can actually use. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to do everything at once, but you do need to see clearly. And once you see clearly, even small changes begin to move you away from the default path over time. That is where real progress starts, not in big moments, but in quiet decisions that shift your trajectory slightly. And those small shifts, repeated consistently, are what eventually create outcomes that feel completely different. So if you have made it this far, you already understand something that most people never take the time to see. Your situation is not random, and it is not simply a result of one bad decision or one missed opportunity. It is the result of patterns, defaults, and systems that shape outcomes slowly, often without your awareness at first. And the moment you begin to see those patterns clearly is the moment you gain the ability to change them. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually in a way that actually lasts and compounds over time. So I am curious, which version do you see yourself in right now? The one following defaults or the one changing direction? Let me know in the comments, because that answer says more about your future than most people realize. And if this video helped you see your situation differently, consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next. Because understanding money is not about quick fixes. It is about seeing clearly and making better decisions consistently. And once you start doing that, even small changes can lead to outcomes that feel completely different over time. Pito.